Hey guys, it's Walt Montero here. Welcome to the show. Just wanted to give you a heads up on this week's interview. We interviewed Scott Hamilton, who is the candidate for the NDP party for the upcoming election. And just wanted to give you a heads up that the show was a little over 40 minutes long. It's a little on the longer side, but some great information. I think you'll enjoy it. I hope you enjoy the show. So obviously, just putting some content out there. Your name is Scott Hamilton. You're the candidate for the NDP party for the upcoming federal election.
Yep, that's correct.
Great. Okay, perfect. So let me ask, what inspired you to do this? Why this? Why now?
Yeah, so it's funny. I teach international politics, climate change politics, international relations, and I thought I would do that for a while, research about it, teach it, write about it. And last year, my wife and I had a baby. And, when you have a kid, my whole perspective started to change. I thought more about the future. What will the future be like for my son when he's my age? I'm 35. And to me, it looked really scary. And I became very frustrated. I started becoming very concerned with a lot of the inaction that I saw happening around issues like climate change, income inequality, addictions crises. So I thought, all right, well, I've taught this stuff. I've written about it. And now it's time to throw my hat in the ring. And if you don't like what's happening politically, then run for office yourself.
Yeah.
Never thought I'd be going into politics, but finally it hit me. I got to try to take action and give it a shot. So that was about a year ago, and here I am.
Very good. Very good. So now, were you an active member of the NDP party beforehand, or how did you choose to run for the NDP?
No, not really. I always think I taught politics, and you're trained to think very critically, right? With any situation, you want to take a step back and ask, who is making claims? Why are they making them? Who does it benefit? What's the history behind this? So although my voting patterns always leaned heavily towards the NDP, I'd never officially joined the party because I always wanted that flexibility to step back,
I see.
engage in critical thinking. This time when I looked at running, for me, if you want to make a great society, you invest heavily in education, you invest heavily in healthcare, social services, those integral parts of our public and our community that really go towards helping people that are in great need. And every time you invest in those services, you get 30 or 40 or 50 fold back in the future. Everyone's happier, healthier, more productive, more inclusive. That was one of the reasons why I went towards the NDP, running for them. And the other was that they had a very bold plan for tackling climate change. It ties very closely into what in the United States is called a Green New Deal. So the NDP's platform is actually called literally a new deal for people. I thought that was really exciting, really progressive. It's in line with all the science of what's needed, but it also takes into consideration all those kind of community factors that a place like Cambridge depends on, the healthcare, the education. So for me, it was an easy choice to run for the NDP.
I see. Okay. So, aside from, for example, the Green Party, did you just find that they were just too one issue focused, or is that what I'm sort of interpreting, or?
In a way, I have a lot of respect for the Greens in terms of their climate platform. I think there are many similarities and overlaps with the NDP in that sense. What I think we're finding that's coming out in the news right now is that the NDP always places a high emphasis on, for example, human rights, a woman's right to choose, making sure that Canada is solid, that there's no leeway given to separatism, for example, Quebec separatism. Climate change is an issue where climate change doesn't have a color. It encompasses literally everything. And to me, green is just a color. But if you want to get into the moral, the ethical, the historical, the cultural underpinnings of what makes a society and a community successful, those are all the things the NDP has a very established track record of defending. When it comes to workers' rights, I mean, if we're going to invent the new low carbon industries of the future, workers, industrial towns like Cambridge have an integral part to play in that. And for me, the NDP had really done a great job in researching how to make that transition as smooth and as fast as possible. So to me, I don't see a color to climate change. I see the need for action, and that's why the NDP's platform really leapt out at me.
I see. Okay. So I don't want to harp too much on that, but I just some of the stuff that I understand about climate change, which is very little. Okay, but my interpretation or my quick presupposition of it is that some of the measures that some parties or groups tend to be proposing come at a very high cost. And when you look at the actual returns or what actual impact some of those changes will have over, the broad aspect, it has very little impact. So is it something for us to be concerned about? Or is it just throwing too much money at something that just may not be able to be resolved with that kind of spend? Or what are your thoughts on that?
Well, climate change is an incredibly difficult problem. And I always say, beware of simple answers to complex problems.
Mm-hmm.
Because if someone's giving you a simple answer to a complex problem, it usually means they're trying to sell you something. And climate change is the most complicated problem I think humanity's ever faced.
Mm-hmm.
What I would say to that is, if we look at the costs of inaction, we're looking at the decline of Western civilization as we know it.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd say that alone is a reason to take very quick action in line with an incredibly thorough body of science and research that's gone on for decades now that says if we don't take substantial action within the next 10 years, we're in for serious trouble.
Mm-hmm.
Look at the global economy right now, the way it's shifting to low carbon industries, to renewables. Cambridge is heavily involved in automotive manufacturing, for example. So if you look at companies like GM, Volkswagen, they're already shifting more towards the electric car sector. They're not even building hybrid cars in the United States anymore. So these are, I think, global trends that an area like Cambridge can really take advantage of to say, well, why don't we build the industry of the future that we want to see here? We know we need to. We know it's going to happen. We know the rest of the world is already going that way. So we can make moves for that as well. When it comes to the actual emission of carbon, I think there's no excuse now for inaction. The science is there. The need is there. We're already seeing millions of displaced people around the world that can no longer live by their shorelines or in their homes due to drought, due to changing weather conditions and severe changes in the pattern of weather. So we have to take some action. And I think necessity is the mother of all invention. So I think if we admit that the political will has to be there, the economy of the future can be there, I really have confidence that we can make a positive change as a community in the direction that now we know we need to take. There's no time left. So I'm more than willing to fight towards that.
Okay, I get it.
Change.
Okay, so now tell us a little bit about yourself. You how long have you been in Cambridge? How long have you lived here? Are you a native of Cambridge? Where is Scott Hamilton from?
Well, it's funny. I grew up in a small town called Tottenham, Ontario.
Oh, yes, okay.
It was like 4,500, 5,000 people when I was growing up there. Its main industries were farming and automotive manufacturing. So it's kind of like a miniature version of Cambridge. I used to work as a landscaper in my early 20s, and then I became a minimum wage retail worker. And I was folding clothes, selling clothes, and I was promoted to manage those stores. Wasn't too wild about it. So I switched over to human resources, and I was a recruiter. Worked at a head office, basically looking for employees around Ontario. Wasn't quite my thing. And so my girlfriend at the time was starting her MBA at the Telfair School of Management in Ottawa. Things were going very well, so I decided to go along with her. And I went back to school as a mature student at the age of 25 for a degree in political science. Working those minimum wage jobs and labor doing landscaping, I was always wondering why the harder I and everyone around me seemed to work, the less we seemed to get ahead. That always bothered me. So I went back to school for poli-sci at the age of 25, studied my butt off, was a complete nerd, ended up getting into a master's degree at the University of Oxford in the UK. I received a full scholarship to study politics at the London School of Economics in the UK. Stayed there. My previous girlfriend that we had done the trip to Ottawa together, she completed her MBA. She was working as a management consultant. We got married. So
oh, wow. Okay, great.
Katie. So yeah, that venture worked out very well.
Yeah.
Both of us, I hope. now we have a baby, and we decided we're in the UK. We want to have a family. Where do we want to go? We love Canada. Our family's here. We love the country. We really missed tall filtered coffees. We really missed watching hockey and basketball.
Yeah.
So we came back and we found Cambridge.
Very good.
I was lucky enough to receive a what's called the Banting postdoctoral fellowship to work at the Balsillie School in Laurier, teaching politics, and Katie works as a management consultant. And a year ago, as I mentioned earlier, that's when the baby came along. My perspective changed, and I thought, all right, I gotta jump into the political fray and try and improve the future a bit.
Yeah, for sure. That's awesome. So now let me ask you a little bit about the party itself. Like when we look at at least when I look at the NDP party, I always find them to be, the third string, or in some cases, they're the party a lot of times that especially big business is very afraid of because of, their social outlooks and, the way they look at taxation and that sort of thing. What can you tell us about that?
I'd say a lot of those fears are probably exaggerated, if not flatly incorrect. Sorry, I don't know if you can still hear me. My neighbor is doing landscaping outside, so if I
can hear you okay.
All right, awesome. So I know my own personal perspective, and every single person I've talked to in the NDP and it's in the platform, no town, especially no small town, will succeed unless its small businesses succeed. I think that's small businesses are the heart of every community. So the NDP knows that and respects that. It supports small business. It doesn't want to do anything to touch small and medium business taxation. So if you look at the current platform right now, the only real alterations in taxation are one thing that's just been costed by the PBO, the Parliamentary Budget Office, is the NDP wants to introduce what's called a super wealth tax. So that is, if you make over $20 million a year, your wealth will go up only a couple percentage points back to the levels they were at in 2010. So just back to recent levels. And that tax on the super wealthy is expected to generate, I think, $70 billion over the next 10 years.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And that's not an unfair tax. That's just ensuring that those who are super wealthy pay fairly, pay as much as I think middle-class Canadians would pay. So when people mention the NDP in taxation, they have horror stories, exaggerations, and in this recent platform, it's like, no, they're pretty decent, costed, budgeted measures that just ensure people pay their fair share. And I know when I pay my taxes, I want them to go to roads, to infrastructure, to hospital, to teachers. But if someone is wealthy enough where they might be able to send their wealth offshore, right, and they don't get invested in those roads, those hospitals, those teachers, I think that is unfair. So right now, I think estimates range between $25 billion and even $80 billion of tax evasion that occurs in Canada. So closing those tax loopholes, that's another NDP policy that I think I really got behind, and I think a lot of medium and small business owners would get behind as well.
Okay, so in terms of the the number of seats that the NDP could potentially get, where do you think that will lie? I know that there are some challenges with regards to, like from what I've heard is that for example, Mr. Singh has not yet really distributed himself around the country enough. There are some complaints even coming out that he hasn't been to New Brunswick yet, and that sort of thing. Where do you sit in that sort of level of thinking?
No, it's funny. When I first decided to run for the NDP, political commentators and people that had run before said, you better get ready to work 5 times as hard just to get to the starting gate of where the Liberals and Conservatives are, because you're not going to be backed by the super wealthy. You're not going to be backed by large corporations. You're going to have to put in a lot of work yourself because you're fighting for the little guy. And it's like, okay, let's see how that goes. I didn't really understand it until I jumped into the race now. And you see, as you mentioned, the treatment that Jagmeet Singh, the federal leader, has received in the media. It echoes very much, I think, if you go back to 2011, there was a leader by the name of Jack Layton. Media was saying he's washed up. He's done a bad job leading. It took him so long to get into parliament to finally make an impact. The NDP is going to collapse nationally. The Liberals at that time were backing up, I think, the Harper Conservative minority government, and everyone was just saying that it's the death of the NDP and the sky is falling. So now we see this repeat with Jagmeet Singh, and the first leaders debate was last night, and I thought he did a tremendous job. Maclean's actually declared him the winner of the debate. I think I'm not shocked. He projected, I think, the poise and the understanding the NDP has of the dynamics locally, nationally, and internationally, the way that those dynamics that Canada wants to be and see in the world. And so when we hear about this leader hasn't gone there or they haven't done that particular aspect right, I do think that it would have been great if Jagmeet had gone out to New Brunswick. I do think that was a mistake. But the NDP also owned up to that and said, whoops, our bad. Which I understand, no party is going to be perfect. But I think the best predictor of the future is also the past. I look at his records, how he's acted, and I'm very confident that Canadians are going to be very surprised over the next 38 days how well he's going to do. And again, if the best predictor of the future is the past, we can look at the other two parties, their track record, and how the country is going, and make judgments accordingly, I think.
So, just kind of throwing it out there, what do you think the chances are of Mr. Singh becoming the Prime Minister?
That's tough, right? Because we've never actually had an NDP Prime Minister.
Yes.
Jack Layton was so close, right? When he was the leader of the opposition only a few years ago. And even knocking on doors now, I talk from people that are ardent, lifelong NDP fans to even a lot of very conservative voters that say, you know what, I like Jack, I would have voted for him. So the Canadian what if that's out there is, what if Jack Layton never would have passed away? What if he never would have gotten sick? That's a good question. But right now we have another great leader. We have another election coming up. So as for the number of seats, the thing I find I love about politics is that it's completely unpredictable.
For sure. I
can't tell. So if we go back to 2015 at this point in time, Thomas Mulcair, right? People were speculating he could have been the next prime minister. Justin Trudeau was running a distant third. You flash forward 40 days later, and all of a sudden the Trudeau government has a majority, and the political landscape of Canada has changed. So I can't predict the number of NDP seats, but I think Canadians will be very surprised on October 21st.
I'm sure it will be a tough one to call. That's for sure. Now, let me ask you. Now, you've brought up Mr. Trudeau. Where do you stand in terms of how he's performed his job so far? Is there anything specifically that you think he's done right, and more importantly, where has he gone wrong?
Yeah, first of all, it's an extremely tough job, I think, to be the prime minister, to be constantly in the limelight, to be under scrutiny. So in that sense, my heart goes out to him, and that he's got a tough job without question. I can speak from personal experience, when he came to St. Benedict's in Cambridge, did a town hall. I found he was very gracious with the crowd. He's very eloquent. He was a good speaker. I thought he treated everyone fairly, even when he disagreed with them. So I do respect him in that sense. He's doing a very tough job. Now, what he has done while doing that tough job, I think he's been extremely inconsistent in backing up promises that he's made with actual substantive action, with real action on the ground. So when I knock on doors now, an issue that comes up frequently is electoral reform. I think one study, give or take, it's a ballpark, but Justin Trudeau had mentioned reforming the electoral system about 1,800 times. It was one of his major campaign promises. That kind of fell by the wayside. Again, I research and I study climate change politics. So taking real action to fight against that on an international stage, that never happened, right? Canada right now is 200 years behind actually making its international commitments for reducing greenhouse gases. It's tough because, and we see recently with, of course, Andrew Scheer always loves bringing up the SNC-Lavalin scandal.
Yes.
I will mention that only because that has an effect over the entire political system. It doesn't matter what party you're running for, and even provincially and municipally. I think when Canadians saw their leader, the person that should be most subject to the rules, laws, and norms of the land, when they saw him say, I acknowledge this happened, but I kind of think I'm above the law. I can do what I think is right, even when the courts tell me that's wrong. I would knock on doors and people were mad at me because they just saw me as some corrupt politician that was willing to step above the law when they weren't able to. So I think it's been those moves, the very nice talk that's not being backed up now by actions that we're seeing on the ground, from electoral reform to climate to SNC-Lavalin, that I think is, people get it. And that's one thing I'm finding across doorsteps right now in Cambridge is just anger and frustration at a political system that I think people largely feel has let them down because the promises they voted for never came to fruition. I think that's a shame. I wish they would have. It would be easier for every politician across Canada. They wouldn't be taking as much flack on the doorsteps, that's for sure. But it is what it is. And that's one of the reasons why I'm running. I think we have to restore a little bit more faith to the political process, and we have to be a little bit more authentic and honest with people about who we are and what we can actually accomplish when we do House of Commons.
Okay, fair, for sure. So let me ask you, it's the day after election. Scott Hamilton wins the riding for Cambridge. And, let's face it, I mean, the NDP, the chances of them forming a government is, in my opinion, probably a little bit slim. Who would you prefer to be the leading party? The Liberals or the Conservatives?
It's tough. As I mentioned earlier, I would never prop up someone who doesn't acknowledge a woman's right to choose, basic human rights, climate change science. All I can say is that the bonus of having an NDP MP, why so many of them get voted back in time and time and again, right? Like the Charlie Anguses, the Nikki Ashtons, is that you have a little bit more freedom and flexibility to actually fight for the unique interests of your riding in the House of Commons. You're not necessarily nailed to the back of the House of Commons by the party whip or by party discipline. You can actually negotiate. You can actually fight for the collective benefit of the town you're coming from, the riding you're coming from, which is, I think, the way that parliamentary democracy is designed to function, right? Now, I know you're asking a question about the leadership. And I think it's an issue that I'm finding with Canada in general right now, and especially with the news media, is that everyone is incredibly focused on what's happening in Ottawa, what are the party talking points. But our democracy is designed to function not like the United States, right? We don't elect a president.
Yeah.
We elect our best local member of parliament who understands our riding, who gets us, who knows the local issues, who has experience in those issues and can actually take those collective interests and fight like heck for them in Ottawa. So I think that's the type of MP, a party like the NDP can offer. It's something that I think a riding like Cambridge could really benefit from. And I don't know if you're familiar with the name Max Saltzman.
Oh, of course, yeah.
So I hear that a lot. Someone actually gave me his pin at the door.
Oh, yeah.
But he was an NDP MP from the Cambridge region, and he was around from 1964 to 1979, and everyone loved him. Liberals, Conservatives, and of course the NDP, because he just fought like heck for the riding. He did what was right for Cambridge. He stood up for the riding in the House of Commons and defended it. And so everyone said, I like Max, because he's not a talking point party line kind of guy. So that's the type of MP I want to be if I'm elected for Cambridge. And that's the type of MP I think all of Canada needs, right? That's what democracy is all about, is elect your best local candidate, let them fight for you, and see what can happen in Ottawa. And right now I think we've got it a bit backwards.
Okay. So now let me ask you, with regards to the Green Party, let's face it, for the most part, I mean, we've been pretty much a three-party country. We've had a couple of different parties come in. We've got, the People's Party coming about. But the Green Party seems to be getting some wheels. What kind of concerns does the NDP party have about that? And how are you planning to sort of address those challenges? Because they have a candidate now in Guelph that seems to be very well respected. And, so and when we look at, what are our choices, basically most people look at and say, well, it's either the Liberals or the Conservatives. And when you're, somebody that is not happy with either one of those, you've got to pick a third choice. Why the NDP over, let's say, the Green Party?
Yeah, I know it's for me. There's the Liberals, there's the Conservatives, there's the Greens, there's the PPC. I know they're all involved in Cambridge politics right now.
Mm-hmm.
I am just going forward for the best interests of Cambridge residents to the best of my ability. When people ask me, like, Scott, you've studied and researched climate change, you teach climate politics. Like, I teach environmental security. Why didn't you go green? It kind of goes back to those reasons we discussed earlier, in that, climate change has no color. Environmental security has no particular color. It's becoming such an important and engrossing issue. It encompasses everything. And that's why when you have an NDP platform like a New Deal for People, it engages industrial strategy, transportation, the way that we get our food, how much carbon we emit into the atmosphere. All of these things are tied together, but also into the historical and cultural issues it ties together as a nation. So respecting First Nations and Indigenous rights, LGBTQ2 plus rights, the history of the way the provinces and territories have become integrated. All of these things need to be factored into an environmental and industrial strategy that lowers these greenhouse gas emissions in ways that I think the Green Party may not address as effectively in many ways. Mm-hmm. And we see that by a lot of the candidates that are coming out now with very interesting stances, whether they're anti-abortion or whether they're pro-Quebec sovereignty. Fair enough, those are their own individual choices, but I don't think you'll find those within the NDP. As for the rise of the Green Party, I think climate change and environmental instability, ecological destruction is now becoming so far and widespread that we can't ignore it anymore. Mm-hmm. And so it's an incredibly important conversation to have. One of the reasons I'm running is so that I can ensure that years from now, my child and everyone's child in Cambridge has a viable, healthy future in this riding. So I think it's fantastic that climate change and ecological issues are now on the political radar like never before. And I think the Green Party has always been seen in the background as that party that's embraced the climatic challenge in many ways. But now that it's gaining more momentum and more steam, we're seeing that you can't just have a party just based on the color green and the climate. Mm-hmm. You have to have those historical, cultural, industrial relations behind you, the understanding of workers, how labor unions function, the history of economic development in Canada. I think all those things factor in very importantly. So that's why, again, I respect the Green Party stance on climate change, but I think there are very significant issues when it goes to the moral, ethical, cultural, historical background of what makes a viable party in Canada.
Got it. Okay. Now, one of the things you just addressed on there, I mean, we could probably talk forever here. The one thing
things politically, yeah, we could talk forever.
I don't want to get too long because I don't like to make the shows too long. Otherwise, they don't get watched or listened to. So, with regards to the the worker, my family immigrated here to Canada in the '60s from Portugal, and my father took on a job. And he was able to sustain a household working by himself. Now, there was a lot of, sacrifice, and there wasn't certainly the extras that certainly are occurring in today's lifestyle. Mm. But, I guess what I'm getting at is the lifestyle of a working man has really, in my opinion, really eroded. Like I'm being in the real estate mortgage business, we watch people coming in to want to buy a home who, in my mind, make a decent wage, but they can't afford to live in Cambridge. What's the answer to that, and how does the NDP address those types of issues?
Yeah, and this, again, it ties in, it's a systemic, structural issue right now. We see it all across Canada and even all across the world, where right now, if you look at the way that wages have been paid out, they've stagnated if you compensate for inflation. So in 1977, the average Canadian worker compensating for inflation made about $24 an hour. Today, they make, again, compensating for inflation, about $25.79. So the average wage has barely gone up. But then you look at the cost of living, it's gone up substantially. Yeah. Right? Average cost of a home was $159,000 in 1984. That exact same home, compensating for inflation, is now about, I think, $369,000. So all of a sudden, you are told to work longer hours, getting pretty much the same pay when the cost of literally everything has gone up. And so that's one of the reasons why Canada is stuck in this gigantic credit crunch right now, right? We're the most indebted country in the G7. It's not because people are spending lavishly and over consuming, although many are. It's because a larger majority of Canadians than ever can't get by on just their basic jobs. So now you have to put your mortgage, the food you buy, car payments, buses on credit because you just don't have that same purchasing power as, like you mentioned, a worker might have had back in the 1960s and 1970s. So that's why I think, and I've done a lot of work in Cambridge over the past 11 months. I've gone to a lot of events, town halls. I've met with almost every head of social service agencies around town. And this is all on my website too. So I'd please invite anyone to go to my website to check it out. I'm not just talking. There's action behind this. So hopefully I can give you.
What's the address of the site?
The address is www.scotthamiltoncambridge.ca. And there you'll find blogs that I just write about issues that I think are important, and also what I call a listening tour. And the listening tour is where I actually sit down with people from around Cambridge. I've met the CEO of the hospital, the chief of police, the chief of fire, Ann Tinker of the Bridges, Cameron Dearlove of the food bank, John Neufeld of the House of Friendship, Greg DeRocher from the Chamber of Commerce. Just sat down with all of them and I've asked them issues that are of concern to Cambridge as a community and let them answer. Because I think the best way to alleviate a lot of misinformation is just to go straight to the source, ask them, and see what they say. But getting back to your original question, sorry about why the purchasing power of workers isn't the same as it was. And one way to alleviate that, every single person that I talked to on this listening tour, especially those that were involved with social services, said some of the same things. And so one of them was, we need to reinvest, the government needs to reinvest heavily in social services. So when people need help, we need to ensure that there are professionals there that can help them. Because what happens if they don't get help? If people have trauma, physical, sexual, emotional trauma, that's a prime candidate for someone who's going to become addicted to something. Affordable housing, that one was across the board. We need more affordable housing. So in the 1990s, the government stopped building affordable houses. One of the things I love about the NDP plan is that it's 500,000 units of affordable housing within 10 years, 250,000 units within 5. And that will alleviate things like this giant housing crunch that we're seeing, pulls people out of poverty, gives them a roof over their head, gives them a reason to get up in the morning, reduces crime, increases rates of education. A whole bunch of social determinants of health just skyrocket up when you invest in affordable housing, when you invest in healthcare, when you invest in social services. As well, reining in spending, like we mentioned before, a lot of loopholes have been put in. So if someone does make extreme amounts of wealth, that wealth can just leave Canada through tax loopholes. While the rest of us, right, those taxes have to be paid with something. So who picks up the tab? It's typically those of us that are
get left behind.
Exactly. So I'd say we know why this disparity between wages and purchasing power is happening. We know the two governments that have always been in place as this crisis has increased. The level of income inequality that we're experiencing now is the highest it's ever been. And now we know the solutions and we have to start somewhere. And I think people are recognizing that more and more around Cambridge. That's why I say, we know we have to get to new places. We will not get to new places by following old paths. So there are some new paths out there we can follow. And I hope to be one of those people leading our riding down that path.
That's great. Well, I wish you the best of luck on the upcoming election. I think your dialogues and your answers have been quite articulate. And I usually like to ask the question in our shows is because it's called I Love Cambridge. Scott,
Sure.
What do you love about Cambridge?
It's an amazing riding. I honestly think it's the best place in Canada. It's got history to it with the architecture. It's got beauty with the river. It's got a makeup unlike any other place in Canada, where it's got almost like a main triangle between Hespeler, right, Galt and Preston, and then add in Blair, add in Ayr, add in North Dumfries, all that whole area of North Dumfries and North Brant. The people that compose Cambridge, right, from the Portuguese community to those coming over from Newfoundland to really all over the world. Its proximity to Toronto, its schools. I mean, the people make the riding, but it's just incredibly unique. And the more that I've walked around Cambridge over the past 11 months, knocking on doors, every day I'm surprised by something. And every day I'm encountered by a very close community connection where someone knows someone whom I've talked to or I've connected with. So it's a very unique place that has the size of a large city, but the feel of a small town, and the beauty of an old English city. So I really think it's unlike any other place in Canada. And I'm very lucky to live here and proud to live here.
Yeah, awesome. It is a great community, that's for sure. So now just to wrap up, was there any question that I didn't ask you that I should have?
That's a great question. Yeah, I guess the one question would be, what's the hardest thing about running for office? Because I do.
Great. Yes, of course. Yeah.
Because when I first started running, I thought, well, is it going to be, engaging people on doors? Is it going to be knocking on someone's door? And I've found the hardest thing, honestly, is every time I'm out knocking on doors. My goal when I initially started running was I will be home every night to be able to put my son to bed, to say goodnight to him. And I haven't been able to do that. It's just been, the campaign sometimes gets too exhausting and it goes too long. And so I have a very patient and understanding family. But the hardest thing is being away from family when you're out working. In the back of your mind, knowing you're trying to do something which is ultimately to benefit them and to help them. But the hardest thing politically isn't anything to do with politics. It's just being away from family.
Personal sacrifice.
That's
yes,
right.
I definitely agree with you. I have a brother in local politics and with city council, and the sacrifices he makes on, from a family perspective, in order to fulfill his obligations are, it's usually very underappreciated and often very criticized too. So I certainly sympathize with that position for sure.
I honestly think now, if anyone knocks on my door for any reason, I have sympathy for them. It's like, that's actually pretty tough.
Oh, for sure.
If someone calls me from the United Way or something, it's like, hey, you know what? You're going out on a limb. You're doing a tough job. So hats off to you for that.
Yeah, great. So be nice to the realtors that call your place too.
Well, that's the thing. To any of your listeners, I say, if someone ever knocks on your door, just have sympathy for them. Have patience. Know they're doing it. So you don't have to buy what they're selling, so to speak, but at least give them a smile and a thanks, and it'll make their day.
Awesome. Well, Scott, thanks so much for being part of the show. This will be distributed, obviously, through a couple of different channels, obviously through Facebook, through iTunes and YouTube. And I wish you the best of luck. And thanks again for being our guest today.
Oh, thanks for having me. That was a lot of fun. Appreciate it.
Awesome.